pause for a moment and let yourself breathe, because something has quietly changed in the invisible space between you and the person who lives in the back of your mind. If you have been carrying an unusual emotional weight lately, if your thoughts keep drifting back to one specific person without any logical reason, if some quiet part of you keeps whispering that something is shifting beneath the surface, this may not be random. This may be exactly the message you needed to find right now. Because the person your soul has been reaching toward is beginning to lose their ability to contain what they feel for you. The walls they built are developing cracks. The distance they constructed is starting to collapse under its own weight. And what they choose to do next may change the entire shape of what exists between you. Not someday in the vague and distant future. Not eventually, when circumstances align perfectly. Sooner than your mind is currently prepared to accept. There is a reason their presence has been feeling louder in your life recently. Not because they are physically closer, but because something energetically has shifted. A reason their absence feels heavier than it used to, as though the silence between you now carries meaning it didn't carry before. A reason the space separating you feels charged, alive, as though something invisible and powerful is quietly gathering momentum just out of sight. The truth that most people never fully understand is this: genuine connection cannot be suppressed indefinitely. This person has been trying to contain what they feel for far longer than you probably realize. They have worked hard to stay composed in the aftermath of whatever happened between you. They convinced themselves they could remain emotionally detached, that if they simply waited long enough, the feeling would soften, weaken, and eventually dissolve on its own. They told themselves this was a choice they were making, not a war they were losing. But the opposite unfolded. The harder they pushed against the connection, the deeper it took root inside them. Every act of resistance only intensified the pull. What began as attraction they believed they could manage quietly became something that followed them into every corner of their life, into the still moments before sleep, into the spaces between conversations, into ordinary Tuesday afternoons when nothing should remind them of you, but everything somehow does. Memories surfaced without invitation, thoughts returned without permission, and beneath all of it, through all the distraction and the denial and the carefully maintained distance, one presence kept recurring inside them with a consistency that eventually became impossible to argue with. Yours. That is why the control is slipping now, because some connections were never designed to be outrun. Some people arrive in your life not as a choice, but as a reckoning, and you were never meant to become something they could simply file away and forget. They may appear completely composed from the outside. They may carry themselves through daily life as though everything is entirely normal, as though nothing inside them is unsettled, as though they are perfectly fine and emotionally unaffected. But that surface is a performance that has been growing harder to maintain. Behind every delayed response, behind every moment of hesitation before sending a message or making contact, behind every confusing swing between warmth and withdrawal, a private internal battle has been quietly consuming them. Because they now understand something that genuinely frightens them. This connection has outgrown every category they tried to place it in. It is no longer casual. It is no longer something they can dismiss with logic or explain away with convenience. They feel something in relation to you that they have not been able to recreate anywhere else, with anyone else, no matter how many distractions they pursued or how much time they allowed to pass. And that realization, the realization that this is singular, that what exists between you is not replaceable, has unsettled them far more deeply than they ever expected it to. They did not plan to arrive here. They did not intend to care this much. And yet here they are, standing at the edge of everything they tried to avoid feeling, unable to pretend any longer that the edge isn't real. Paragraph 4. When someone encounters a connection they cannot rationally account for, the first response is almost never openness. It is resistance. And the resistance is not weakness. It is actually evidence of how significant the connection feels. Because real love demands something from people. It demands honesty. It demands growth. To truly love you, they would first have to stop being dishonest with themselves. They would have to drop the pretense, release the carefully constructed emotional distance, and confront everything this bond stirred up inside them. They would have to let go of old fears that have governed their behavior for years. Old emotional patterns, old protective habits, old versions of themselves that no longer reflect who they are actually becoming. They would have to step out of the identity built around not needing anyone, around being in control, around keeping love at arm's length where it feels safer. Part of them has been genuinely terrified of that process. Terrified that moving fully toward you means their life changes in permanent and irreversible ways. Terrified that once they speak what you truly mean to them out loud, the version of themselves that lived behind walls simply ceases to exist. And, in a sense, it would. Because that is what love does when it is real. It makes the guarded, defended, emotionally armored version of a person obsolete. They have known this, and knowing it made the running feel necessary. Until now. But something fundamental is shifting inside them now, and the shift is not subtle anymore. They are reaching an emotional threshold that most people only arrive at after long internal exhaustion, the point where fear is no longer powerful enough to outrun longing. The heart can only maintain a posture of retreat for so long before the effort of maintaining it becomes greater than the risk of finally standing still. Pretending grows heavier than honesty. Silence becomes more suffocating than the vulnerability of speaking. Distance begins to feel not like protection, but like a form of self-inflicted punishment, something they chose at a moment when it seemed logical, and that now costs them more each day than it gives. This person is approaching exactly that edge, the edge where the internal calculation changes permanently, where the question stops being, "How do I protect myself from this feeling?" and becomes, "How much longer can I afford to keep running from it?" They are not there yet, in a complete sense. There are still traces of hesitation, still remnants of the old protective instinct. But the momentum has changed direction. What was once a retreat is becoming something else. A slow, reluctant, sometimes frightened, but increasingly inevitable turning back toward you. Their soul has grown tired of running from something it was built to move toward. You may have already sensed the early signs of this shift without fully trusting what you were sensing. Their attention finds its way to you unexpectedly. A notification, a reference, something that carries their energy appearing at a moment when you weren't looking for it. Their name keeps surfacing in your awareness repeatedly, as though your inner world is already tuned to a frequency only they occupy. Memories of them arrive uninvited, sharp and clear in ways that old memories don't usually remain. The universe keeps placing strange, quiet reminders of them in your path. A song, a phrase, a detail that belongs to them and nobody else. And while it would be easy to dismiss these as coincidence, they are not. They are emotional signals. The outer world reflecting an inner reality that is actively in motion. Something inside this person has been accumulating pressure for a long time. The longing has been building. The recognition has been deepening. The understanding that losing you permanently would hurt them in ways they are not prepared for has been growing steadily louder. And when that understanding reaches a certain volume, emotional restraint stops being a choice they can make. It becomes a wall that simply gives way under the weight of everything behind it. That giving way is what you have been sensing. That is the movement you have been feeling in the quiet between you. There comes a particular moment inside people when internal resistance begins to dissolve, not all at once, but steadily, unmistakably. On the outside, they continue appearing normal. They move through their routines, their responsibilities, their conversations with other people. They maintain the appearance of someone who is fine, who is moving forward, who has made peace with the distance. But internally, something has fundamentally changed. Thoughts of you have become harder to quiet. Not occasional, not manageable, but persistent in a way that interrupts focus and bleeds into moments where you have no logical business appearing. Emotions have grown harder to contain. Memories have become sharper over time, rather than fading the way memories are supposed to when something is genuinely over. This is not the experience of someone who has moved on. This is the experience of someone whose inner world has reorganized itself around a presence it cannot release. You have become emotionally unavoidable to them. A song carries you back into their awareness before they can stop it. A phrase in a conversation suddenly belongs entirely to you. Quiet evenings become treacherous because silence removes every last distraction and gives the feeling space to rise fully to the surface. Even when they are surrounded by people, something underneath the noise keeps returning to you with a fidelity that has nothing to do with choice and everything to do with how deeply this connection has embedded itself inside them. What they have been fighting all this time is not you, it is themselves. And that battle, the exhausting, unrelenting, quietly devastating battle of trying to overpower something your own heart has already decided, is the reason they have seemed so inconsistent. Some days they move closer, drawn by something they cannot name. Other days they retreat again, pulled back by the part of them that still believes distance is safety. This back and forth is not indifference wearing a convincing disguise. It is evidence of a genuine internal war between what they feel and what they believe they should feel, between what they want and what they fear. Emotional distance, when it appears in the context of a connection this deep, is almost never absence of feeling. It is almost always the opposite. Feelings that became too overwhelming for someone who doesn't yet fully know how to hold them. You didn't simply enter this person's life and create attraction. You disrupted something. You walked into patterns they had inhabited for years and made those patterns feel insufficient. You challenged walls they had built with great effort and believed were permanent. You reached parts of them they had quietly agreed somewhere along the way to simply stop visiting. That kind of contact transforms people at a cellular level, and transformation is almost never comfortable. It is disorienting. It is sometimes frightening. It asks something of a person before it gives anything back. They believed at first that logic would eventually carry them to safety, that if they kept enough distance, the attachment would naturally weaken with time, that the rational mind, given enough space, would reassert its dominance over the feeling and restore something like equilibrium. But time did something unexpected. Instead of weakening the connection, distance amplified it. Your absence became louder than your presence used to be, more present in their daily experience, not less. And that realization shook something loose in them because it revealed a truth they had been actively avoiding. You were never simply another person moving through their life. You became significance. You became the internal standard against which other connections are quietly measured and quietly found lacking. Other conversations feel flatter now. Other people feel farther away, as though something essential is missing from every interaction that you would have made complete. Once the soul genuinely recognizes something real, ordinary experience stops feeling sufficient. This person has been living inside that insufficiency, feeling the gap you left without quite being willing to name it, comparing every emotional experience back to what existed with you without even making the choice to do so. That involuntary comparison has been doing the work of dismantling their resistance far more effectively than anything external ever could have. Slowly, steadily, piece by piece, they tried distraction. They pursued busyness, new experiences, new connections, anything that might fill the space your absence created, or at least make it feel smaller. They tried denial, telling themselves the feeling wasn't what it was, that they were simply adjusting to change, that everyone goes through periods like this. They tried to intellectually reduce the connection to something manageable, something that could be filed away and revisited later from a safer emotional distance. None of it worked, because what you awakened in them goes far deeper than anything distraction or denial can reach. You didn't simply leave a memory, you left a recalibration. You shifted how they experience emotional depth, what they recognize as real, what they now understand themselves to be capable of feeling. People who enter your life and leave memories are common. People who enter your life and permanently rearrange your emotional landscape are rare. You were the second kind for them. You awakened honesty in someone who had become skilled at performing contentment. You awakened longing in someone who had convinced themselves they were self-sufficient. You awakened vulnerability in someone who had spent years building structures specifically designed to prevent it. And perhaps most powerfully, most disruptively, you awakened hope. Hope that genuine connection is real. Hope that love can carry actual weight and meaning rather than just going through familiar motions. That particular awakening does not sleep once it has been stirred. Now they are exhausted. Not the surface exhaustion of a busy life, but the deep, bone-level exhaustion that accumulates when you spend an extended period of time fighting something your own soul has already chosen. Exhausted from pretending that the distance doesn't cost them anything. Exhausted from performing emotional indifference they stopped genuinely feeling a long time ago. Exhausted from carrying the weight of what they feel in silence while showing the world a composed and unaffected face. Exhausted from the specific loneliness of missing someone you are choosing, or trying to choose, not to reach toward. Their inner world has become genuinely chaotic beneath the composed surface. One part of them wants to move toward you immediately, to simply stop the performance and say what is true. Another part still fears the cost of that honesty, the vulnerability, the exposure, the uncertainty of not knowing how it will land. One part wants certainty before risking anything. Another part already understands, on some level they can't quite silence, that certainty will never arrive through continued distance. It can only arrive through the willingness to step forward without a guarantee. And this conflict between knowing and fearing has grown heavier with every passing week, every quiet night, every moment that should feel complete but doesn't because you are not in it. The realization that has been humbling them most deeply is not simply that they miss you. It is that they almost let something irreplaceable go. People rarely understand the true weight of genuine emotional connection until absence has had enough time to reveal what it actually cost them. Your soulmate has been living inside that revelation, feeling it in the quiet moments, in the evenings when life should feel full and somehow doesn't, in the middle of ordinary days when nothing dramatic is happening, and yet the awareness of your absence lands with unexpected force. Once someone has experienced connection at this level, connection that feels like genuine recognition rather than familiar comfort, ordinary interactions stop feeling complete. There is a quality missing from everything, a depth that other relationships don't reach, a particular kind of ease and aliveness that only existed with you. They know this now. They feel the shape of what is absent even when they cannot yet bring themselves to name it fully. And that knowing, that clear, undeniable, no longer avoidable knowing, is what is finally breaking the resistance down. Not pressure from the outside, not pursuit or pleading, simply the truth that has been quietly accumulating inside them all this time, growing louder and more insistent with every day that passes, until it becomes the thing they wake up to and fall asleep beside and carry through every hour in between. Their next move is approaching. And when it arrives, It will not feel like a casual gesture. It will not carry the lightness of someone reaching out without much at stake. It will carry the unmistakable weight of someone who has crossed a threshold internally, who has stopped fighting the truth and started, however imperfectly, moving toward it. It may arrive as a message that appears without obvious reason, a conversation that begins about something ordinary and quietly becomes something else entirely, an admission embedded between other words, offered tentatively, testing the ground before committing fully to the honesty underneath, a moment of unguarded vulnerability from someone who has guarded everything for a very long time. Whatever form it takes, understand this: none of it will be truly spontaneous. Every word will be the result of something that has been building inside them across days and weeks and months. Every suppressed thought, every swallowed feeling, every moment they reach for their phone and stop themselves, every quiet decision to keep the distance that now costs more than it protects. That accumulated weight is what will finally produce the movement. And when it does, you will feel the difference between this and everything that came before it. Because it won't come from confusion. It will come from a person who has finally, after a long and exhausting internal journey, arrived at the truth. And here is the deeper truth that very few people fully understand until they have lived through a connection like this themselves. What has been happening between you was never simply a waiting period. It was never meaningless silence. It was never empty distance. Even during the moments that felt confusing, stagnant, or painfully uncertain, something important was still unfolding beneath the surface. Transformation was taking place quietly, invisibly, in ways neither of you could fully recognize at the time. Because connections that carry real emotional gravity do not leave people unchanged. They cannot. They move through the deepest layers of identity. They expose fears people did not realize they were carrying. They awaken long-buried desires for intimacy, safety, vulnerability, and belonging. And when someone has spent most of their life protecting themselves emotionally, that kind of connection does not feel simple at first. It feels overwhelming. It feels destabilizing. It feels dangerous precisely because it matters so much. That is why this journey has never only been about whether another person would eventually return, confess feelings, or finally become emotionally available. The deeper purpose of this experience has always been what it awakened within you. Because while they were struggling internally, wrestling with fear, avoidance, emotional confusion, or the weight of feelings they could not easily process, you were being transformed too. You were learning how to remain emotionally open without abandoning yourself in the process. And that lesson alone changes everything. Before this connection, you may have believed love required constant pursuit. You may have believed that if someone pulled away, your responsibility was to chase harder, prove more, sacrifice more, or make yourself smaller in order to preserve the connection. Many people spend years trapped inside that cycle without realizing how deeply it drains them. They confuse emotional exhaustion with devotion. They confuse self-abandonment with loyalty. But this experience began teaching you something entirely different. You learned that real love cannot be forced into existence through desperation. You learned that genuine emotional connection does not require you to lose your dignity, silence your needs, or live in a constant state of anxiety. You learned that your worth remains intact even when someone else is confused about their feelings. Their inability to fully show up emotionally was never evidence that you were unlovable. It was evidence of their own unresolved fears, wounds, and internal limitations. That realization changes a person at the deepest level, because once you truly understand that your value exists independently of someone else's behavior, you stop collapsing every time you encounter uncertainty. You stop measuring your importance through another person's responsiveness. You stop treating silence as proof of rejection, and perhaps most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself emotionally in order to keep someone else close. That is one of the greatest shifts this connection has created within you. You began learning how to hold love without gripping it too tightly. You began learning how to care deeply while still remaining grounded in yourself. You began learning that emotional maturity is not about controlling outcomes. It is about remaining connected to your own inner stability, regardless of what another person is doing externally. That kind of growth is profound. And while you were learning these lessons consciously, something equally significant was happening within them. Because distance has a strange way of clarifying emotions that confusion once clouded. When someone suppresses genuine feelings out of fear, those feelings rarely disappear. More often, they deepen in silence. What they tried to escape begins following them internally. Memories become louder. Emotional absence becomes more noticeable. The connection they once tried to rationalize away continues surfacing in quiet moments they cannot fully control. This is especially true for emotionally avoidant individuals. At first, retreat creates temporary relief. Space allows them to regain a sense of control over emotions that once felt too intense. They convince themselves that distance will weaken attachment. They tell themselves that stepping away is logical, necessary, or emotionally safer. But over time, something unexpected often begins happening. The emotional numbness they were seeking never fully arrives, because authentic connection leaves an imprint. And once someone has experienced emotional safety, emotional depth, or genuine resonance with another person, ordinary interactions often begin feeling strangely empty in comparison. They may continue functioning normally on the surface. They may distract themselves with work, routines, responsibilities, or other relationships. But internally, something remains unresolved. You, not simply as a person, but as an emotional experience they cannot easily replace. And this is where many connections begin transforming in ways neither person initially expected.